don't make this common velo training mistake. And that mistake essentially is to chase training metrics or chase throwing metrics without an actual plan to transfer those to the game. So chasing some of these metrics completely out of context. So let's get into exactly what I mean in this video. So we talk a lot about the performance pie, where there's a ton of different variables that all influence performance, whether that be nutrition, whether that be the performance psychology side, whether that be strength training, whether that be throwing and mechanics, a ton of different variables. The point is that for each of these different variables, there's a ton of different metrics or KPIs that we can chase. We can chase velocity numbers, we can chase strength numbers, but we need to just make sure that we don't get completely lost and obsessed in some of these numbers outside of the context of what actually is going to transfer to in-game performance. So for example, does anyone actually care about what Dustin May's pull down PR is? Whether it's 100 miles an hour or 105 miles an hour? No. Does anyone actually care about what Dylan Cease's bullpen velo is? No. Does anyone actually care about what Noah Syndergaard's squat 1 rep max is? Right, you kind of can see where I'm going with this. These certain metrics, it's not that they can't be helpful, it's not that they don't have any bearing, but they're really just secondary indicators that can contribute to performance. These things really only matter in terms of their relationship with performance. So they only matter if this can lead to sustainable, usable velocity improvements in stuff, ability to throw strikes, command the ball, and actually compete when the lights are on and the game is on the line. So all of these different metrics can matter, just don't lose sight of the end goal when you are trying to improve these metrics. So a few examples of losing sight of the end goal to chase metrics. One might be an example of pull downs, right? A lot of us have done pull downs for training velocity, right? But let's say we're just working on sprinting 100 feet across the gym, across the facility, across the field, and falling on our face and grunting and somersaulting, and it really just becomes this unusable velocity improvement where the transfer part just doesn't really happen. If we're completely selling out for throwing 101 from a 100 mile an hour pull down, but to do that, we're just sailing balls over the backstop, running 100 feet, falling on our face, right? Another example might be selling out for a bullpen velocity number, right? If you need to chug 2 Red Bulls and get slapped on the back and take a smelling salt and spike the ball or sail the ball into the backstop to hit a 1 mile an hour velo PR in a bullpen, right? That's an example, again, of selling out for a certain KPI. It's really not going to transfer. It's not going to lead to usable, sustainable, improved performance in a game setting. What about a squat? Are we adding knee wraps and smelling salts and lifting belts, all this stuff, just so that we can hit a 5-pound PR on our squat, in the weight room in an off-season training session, right? Is that actually going to translate to better in-game performance this spring to take our squat from 400 pounds to 405 pounds with all this accessory stuff? Probably not. Again, it's not that pull downs are bad. It's not that throwing hard in bullpen is bad. It's not that squatting is bad and strength is bad. It's just that we need to be able to maintain sight of the end goal in terms of what we're doing and not get lost in minutia. Right, we can all think of guys who spend a bunch of time working on pull downs and they can pull down 100 miles an hour, but they still throw 88 miles an hour in the game and get shelled. We can all think of guys who squat 400 or 500 pounds and they have giant legs, but they still throw low or mid 80s, and it just doesn't transfer. So this general theme can apply to your throwing routines, it can apply to your lifting routines, it can apply to everything that you're doing. Let's just give a specific example here in regards to an off-season velocity throwing program, because I know that's where a lot of you guys are probably coming at this video from. Let's say we're thinking about doing a 12-week velocity plan, right? Maybe it includes weighted balls, maybe it includes long toss, pull downs. It doesn't really matter. Let's say we have 12 weeks, and let's say we're throwing 88 to 90 miles an hour right now, right? That represents a lot of college guys probably watching this video, even some pro guys. They're trying to gain a few ticks. Okay, you have a couple of different scenarios and ways to approach this problem. What a lot of guys do, and the mistake they make, is that they take this 12 weeks and they don't really prioritize the actual transferability of that training. They say, I'm gonna take 8 or 10 weeks of these and just focus on pull downs. And every single week I'm gonna try to PR, I'm never gonna deload, and I'm gonna sell out to try to gain as much velo as I can. And in their mind, velo just means what I can hit one time in any context on a radar gun, even if that's in a sprinting pull down across the gym, falling on your face, sailing the ball into the backstop. And so they spend 10 weeks. Maybe you take your pull down from 90 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour. You're feeling real good about that. You think you're up 10 miles an hour. Maybe 5 of that will transfer. You're getting real excited. And then you just immediately hop on the mound a couple weeks before you have to report to the season or spring training or what have you. and maybe you hit 93, but you're just spiking balls, you're sailing balls into the backstop, your command's just not quite where it needs to be. Again, you get in season, you get to spring training, you get in games or inter squads, and you realize, hey, I need to actually back off the gas pedal now because I didn't focus on throwing strikes, I didn't focus on actually transferring that. And hey, now you're back down to 88 to 90 miles an hour because you got to now take your foot off the gas pedal to locate that ball in the strike zone and actually utilize your arsenal in a game setting. And so we see that all the time. You think you've gained all this velocity and then you actually don't transfer any of it in season. And a lot of guys will have a bad year because they just forgot one of the most important pieces, which is that final transferability piece and the actual skill of pitching. The flip side is that now we can look at this 12-week problem and we know that any velocity that we gain, we want to make sure that it's as sustainable and transferable to in-game performance as possible. So we're not going to necessarily work to improve our pull down by 10 miles an hour, but we know that any velocity that we do gain, it needs to be as usable as possible. So off the bat, maybe we say that last 6 weeks, that's kind of a sacred period where we want at least 6 weeks where we're off the mound, we're slowly adding context, whether that be catchers, stand-in hitters, throwing in lives, and just really getting prepared for the season and utilizing that arsenal in context. So, okay, we actually only have 6 weeks of kind of raw velo type work, totally out of context. An example of that, again, pull downs into a net or something of, weighted ball throws, max effort into a net, something like that would be out of context velo training. Again, not terrible. It's not like it can't be used. It's just knowing what time of the off season to do that type of work and having a plan. So maybe we spend the first 4 weeks of that 12 weeks working on some out of context velo stuff. And maybe instead of sprinting pull downs, we do leg lift curl hops because we've seen, improved transfers from the slightly better specificity. We can still get a little bit of an overload stimulus on the arm, overspeed stimulus on the arm, and maybe we drive that number from 90 miles an hour to 96, right? We don't go from 90 to 100, but we know that that 6 mile an hour gain likely represents more usable velocity and a better transfer. Maybe then we spend the next 2 weeks working on maybe some flat ground work to a catcher and some mound blending. Maybe we add in mound plyos, again, just getting comfortable with the slope. And again, now we're in that 6 week sacred period where we can really begin to ramp up the context. And this introduces our level 1 through 10 bullpen concept. I'm going to go ahead and link that video down below. But essentially we can start adding in layers of context. Maybe we get off the mound to a catcher, just fastballs, and now we're off the mound to a catcher with a stand-in hitter at the next bullpen. And now we're throwing, a few of our other pitches, and now we're having catchers call pitches and keeping counts, and now we're throwing in, live BPs. So we can slowly add these layers of context to really optimally prepare pitchers for a game setting and make sure that as much of that velocity that we gain is actually transferred and usable as possible. So maybe in scenario A, again, you touch 93 out of context in a bullpen, just sailing balls. And maybe in context, in scenario B, we're also 90, 93 miles an hour, but it's usable, it's in the zone, everything is exactly where we need it. And we spent 6 weeks before reporting getting extremely comfortable pitching with this arsenal in a game setting. So which example is going to lead to better performance come spring? I think it's fairly self-explanatory. And again, our experience really bears that out in terms of how we used to do things 5, 6, 7 years ago to making that pivot over the last several years and just seeing how much better guys actually perform when they go in season. So in summary, what I want you guys to take away from this video is that we should be identifying our limiting factors. We should be identifying relevant KPIs or metrics to be shooting for, whether that's a pull down number, whether that's a squat number, a lifting number, power number. We should be working towards improving these things. But in isolation, these things really are not what matters. They're really secondary. So we need to make sure that we're not losing sight of the overall end goal in terms of what we're training. Coaches should keep this in mind. Obviously, as the athlete, you should keep this in mind as well if you find yourself just fully chasing and going all in on one metric and it just isn't really making sense. That's a question you should ask of your coach and ask of the plan that you're following. And is this actually going to help me come springtime, or is this really a counterproductive use of my energy and resources right now? Thanks again for watching, guys. Hope you got some value. Drop a comment down below if you agree, disagree, have any questions for me. I'll see you guys in the next video.